Your driver. I told him to go. Said I would call.
The ankle snapped sideways, and the woman was on the ground before the railing finished the sentence it had started. Not a stumble. Not the soft negotiation of someone who misjudged a curb and caught themselves.
It's already swelling.
This was a joint refusing a load it had been handed without warning, one clean betrayal, one hard landing, and then silence. The kind of silence that means the body is still processing damage and hasn't yet decided how to report it. Lillian was at the front desk, keys in her hand. Bag on her shoulder. 40 seconds from done with the Tuesday. The sound came through the glass before it had a name. Impact, then nothing. Not the nothing of safety, the other kind. She was already moving, Seoul in October. The specific hour when the daylight has committed to leaving but hasn't fully gone, a flat gray-gold light that makes the street look like a photograph of itself. The step outside the studio. The one with the slight uneven lip she had flagged in August and not yet followed up on. At the base of it, a woman on the ground, silver hair pinned at the nape. A light coat over clothes that were not accidental, chosen, arranged, the kind of presentation that represents a decision about how one intends to move through the world that day. One hand gripped the railing's lowest bar. The other pressed flat to the pavement. She was pushing herself upright through the specific mechanism of will, which was not working. The ankle was telling a different story. Already beginning to swell, that fast, ugly bloom that means the body has absorbed something real and is not interested in minimizing it for anyone's benefit. Lillian went to her knees beside her. Move yet? Woman looked up. And here was the thing about the eyes, they were not frightened. Pain was present. Effort was present. The dignity of someone trying to manage a situation that had gotten ahead of her was present. But underneath all of it, assessment. Clean and immediate. She was reading Lillian the way you read something you want to understand before you decide what to do with it. I am fine. Careful English. Each word placed. Lillian's hands were already at the ankle, not clinical, not performing thoroughness, just reading. 7 years of learning how bodies speak. The swelling was genuine. Every small shift the woman made, the tightening at the jaw, the fraction of held breath was genuine. The fine was not. It's already swelling. No softness applied to the delivery. Just the fact, what's your name? I can manage. She moved to stand. Lillian's hand reached her shoulder, light, not restraining, the hand of someone who has already made a decision and is communicating it through contact rather than argument. No, you can, said the way things are said when they are true and the truth is not the point. I'm helping you anyway, is that all right? A long look. Real. The kind of look that is actually deciding something. Lillian didn't move. Didn't soften her expression to make the waiting easier. Something shifted in the woman. Not surrender, recalibration. Kang, Lillian, already repositioning, reading the angles. One arm behind the back, one beneath the knees. She had done this before in different configurations with different bodies, always the same principle. Carry the weight completely or don't offer to carry it at all. Tell me if anything gets worse. She lifted, not a performance of effort. 7 years meant the intelligence lived in the body now. The adjustment came before the need announced itself. The distribution of weight was automatic. The steadiness required no maintenance. There was no visible strain, no moment of recalibration, no hesitation in the transfer. The body simply did what it knew how to do. The way a thing done 10,000 times has moved past the reach of conscious management into something quieter and more certain than thought. Mrs. Kang's breath came in sharp and short. Not pain, surprise. She had been bracing for the halfway kind. The help to standing, supported to the car, still managing the rest yourself kind. The assistance that is really just witnessed effort, that gives you a hand and then releases you to carry the remainder. She had not been prepared for lifted entirely, for weight fully transferred, for nothing left on her side of the equation. Her body understood it a full second before she did. Then her body went still, the specific stillness of something that has stopped bracing against a fall it is no longer in. She was being carried. Completely. Without reservation and without hesitation, in the way that things are carried when the person doing the carrying has decided that halfway was never an option. Lillian walked. Measured. She knew this street. The pavement shifted between the third and fourth panel. She adjusted her weight there without slowing. She spoke as she moved, not filling space but giving the woman something real to hold on to. Your driver. I told him to go, said I would call. Phone in your bag, already reaching. The phone found without fumbling, the call placed in 3 clean lines, address, instruction, a tone that meant immediately, not when convenient. The composure required for that inside the pain she was clearly managing. Lillian noted it. It was telling. She adjusted her hold twice during the call. Small corrections. Each time Mrs. Kang's body sent a signal, Lillian's arms responded before the signal became discomfort. Mrs. Kang noticed both adjustments. She said nothing, but the noticing was in her face, brief and specific, before the phone call required her attention back. The car arrived. Black sedan. Lillian didn't put her down to wait, no reason to introduce the ankle to the ground again when the car was already here. She opened the door with her foot. Lowered Mrs. Kang into the seat with the same quality of attention as the lift. Steady, exact, not released until the settling was complete. Ankle away from the door frame. Positioned with care. Checked. Elevate the moment you're home. Now, not later. Ice 20 minutes on, 20 off. Doctor in the morning, I want that confirmed, not assumed. Kang looked at her through the open door with an expression that Lillian would not have been able to fully name in that moment. Gratitude was in it. And something older than gratitude, something that had been activated by the specific quality of the carry and had not yet finished drawing its conclusions. You do this, she said. Help people. I run a wellness studio, elderly clients. No, the correction was not unkind. It was precise. You, not the studio, you. No answer available for that. Lillian straightened, closed the door carefully, watched the car pull away from the curb and move into the street and turn at the far corner. The evening settled back around her. She was 3 steps toward the door when the light caught it. A thin silver chain lying against the pavement, almost invisible in the dimming light. A jade pendant at its center, small, clearly personal, clearly not new. The kind of object that has been worn long enough to stop being jewelry and become part of the person wearing it. It had come loose in the fall. She could see the broken clasp from where she stood. The car was already gone. Lillian crouched, picked it up, felt the small weight of it settle in her palm, lighter than it looked, warmer than the pavement it had been lying on. She closed her fingers around it, went inside. She didn't replay the date on the drive home. She had been replaying it since last night, and she was finished. Not resolved, finished. The specific exhaustion of going over something that has no clean conclusion and will not produce one no matter how many additional passes you give it. The first dinner with Sung-ho had been almost something. That was the truest description available, and she had been trying to improve on it for 24 hours without success. 2 moments during the evening where the performance had dropped on both sides at once. The first when she said something unscripted, and his expression shifted before the control caught it. The second when he offered an opinion he clearly had not planned to offer, and then watched her receive it with an attention he hadn't expected from her. Both moments real. Both brief. The performance coming back each time before either of them could decide what to do with the gap it had briefly opened. The curb outside the restaurant. The hesitant goodnight that meant neither of us is sure enough to reach for more, and neither of us is ready to say we wanted to. 2 people standing on opposite sides of an unspoken thing that neither of them named. She got into the cab. She didn't look back. She had thought about looking back 3 times before the cab turned the corner and the option disappeared. She had replayed those 2 real moments more than anything else. The problem with genuine moments embedded inside a framework of performance is that they have no stable context. They sit in the file marked unresolved, and the file accrues interest the longer it stays open. She was tired of that file. The necklace was in the front pocket of her bag. She would figure out the return in the morning. She did not know she wouldn't have to wait that long, 40 minutes into the morning. Studio opened, mats in position, kettle on. The first session not until 11. A particular quality of silence that belongs to a room before anyone has arrived to fill it. The phone rang. Number she didn't have saved. Miss Harris. Mrs. Kang's voice, measured. The warmth in it chosen rather than reflexive, the warmth of a woman who is warm on purpose, which is a different and more deliberate thing. I am calling to thank you. The call did not stay in the territory of thank you. She asked about the bamboo flooring near the entrance, whether it was original or whether it had been replaced. Lillian stopped mid-sentence. She had been in pain and on the ground in the dark of an October evening, and she had been cataloging the flooring. 3 years ago, I had it redone. I thought so. A pause. New floors in old buildings sound different, more certain. You were paying close attention. I pay close attention to things that matter. Brief. Weighted on both sides of it. My son will tell you it is his least favorite quality of mine. Questions that followed had structure beneath their surface. The studio hours, Tuesday mornings specifically. The therapeutic massage background Lillian had mentioned to someone, at some point, though she had not mentioned it to Mrs. Kang, which meant there was a source the woman was not nomming. The workshop program. The elderly rehabilitation focus. Not casual questions. Questions with a destination, asked by someone who already knew the terrain and was checking the map against the territory. You have strong hands. For a yoga instructor. Therapeutic massage training before the transition. The body keeps what it practices. One word. Too much weight for one word. Not always a gift. For you it is. A silence. The kind that is actually a decision being made on one end of the line. Your grandmother, Mrs. Kang said. The one you mentioned, is she well? Lillian had offered the grandmother in passing half a sentence, a detail dropped in service of a different answer. She had not expected it to be retrieved and held. 81. She does not need me to carry her anywhere. She is very specific about that. Something moved in Mrs. Kang's voice, subtle, gone before it fully arrived. She sounds like a woman I would respect. 20 minutes. The call ended with the deliberate quality of a woman who says things once and means them precisely on the first attempt. A declared intention to be in touch that was not social, it was certain. Lillian set the phone down and stood in the studio quiet. She understood, before she could have explained the understanding, that the call had been about more than the ankle. That somewhere inside the questions and the pauses and the brief movement in Mrs. Kang's voice, when she heard about the grandmother, a case had been assembled. For whom, or toward what end, she could not fully determine. She answered everything honestly because honest was the only register she operated in. She didn't know what Mrs. Kang said to her son after the call ended. She didn't know about the tone, the one reserved for things said once and not repeated. She didn't know about the specific words. That woman carried me like I was worth carrying, and I need you to not be awkward about this one. Sung-ho did not respond immediately. His mother didn't require him to, 90 minutes after she set the phone down. A knock. She opened the door, Sung-ho on the other side. Dark coat. The controlled composure she had spent an entire dinner trying to read. His right hand extended, and in it, the silver chain, the jade pendant, the thing she had been carrying in her pocket without knowing whose it was. The silence between them took up a specific amount of space. The necklace belongs to my mother. Even voice. Something underneath the even she couldn't place yet. She told you. Described you. A fraction of something moved in his expression, minimal, present, not fully identified. I knew who she was talking about before she finished. It arrived in pieces and then all at once. Mrs. Kang on the pavement, the carry, the ankles swelling, and this man across a restaurant table 36 hours ago. The curb, the cab she had taken without looking back. One city. One accidental collision of two worlds that were not, as it turned out, as separate as either of them had been operating under the assumption they were. She stepped back from the door. He came in. She made 2 cups. The kettle doing the work of the pause, giving both of them somewhere to be, while the information settled into something handleable. He sat in the chair by the large window. The one her clients used for cooldown. He held the cup in both hands, both, unguarded, and she noted that she had not seen him hold anything at dinner with both hands. The armor of the public version had not fully assembled itself, yet at 10 in the morning in an empty studio where he had arrived with a necklace, and a surprise he hadn't planned on being part of. She sat across from him. Did not manage the silence. They talked around the date, and the curb the way people move around something they've silently agreed, without discussing the agreement, to approach differently later. She told him about the studio, 4 years, built alone, the elderly specialization that had started with her grandmother, and the specific revelation of watching a body recover agency it had been told to abandon. He told her about his mother, capable of arriving anywhere unannounced and expressing complete bewilderment at being considered a surprise, a quality he described with the layered, weary precision of a man who has been outmaneuvered by the same person for decades and has stopped pretending to resent it. She laughed. Not a social laugh, the other kind. Unscheduled. He looked at her when she laughed. Directly. The third real moment. The control dropped and something was there underneath it, and this time it didn't rush to reassemble. She asked about the pendant. Age, origin. He told her his grandmother had carried it from the south when she was young. His mother wore it on days she considered significant. He said the last part without appearing to notice what it contained. She did not reach for it. When he stood to go, 40 minutes had passed. He had not planned to stay 40 minutes. She walked him to the door. Moon Jae-ho at the curb, the patience of someone paid to wait and competent enough that the waiting never becomes commentary. Sung-ho opened the car door, paused before getting in brief, not nothing, and got in. She went back inside, On the drive back, Moon Jae-ho kept his eyes where they belonged. You stayed 40 minutes for a necklace return. No inflection. No invitation for response. The observation placed in the air between them and left exactly there, not pushed, not retrieved. 7 years of being the most trusted person in someone's world teaches you the specific architecture of when the observation itself is the entire message and anything added to it would only reduce it. Sung-ho looked at the city going past the window. The observation settled between them and did not require anything further. Mrs. Kang called at noon. Confirmed sprain, mild. Elevation had worked. Dr. Thorough. She mentioned, with the specific satisfaction of a woman who had suspected something was correct and required outside confirmation to announce it, that the positioning advice given outside the studio had been exactly right. Then the call did not end. Hours, therapeutic background, the workshop program Lillian had mentioned to Sung-ho at some point during the dinner that Mrs. Kang had clearly already been briefed on. A source not named. Questions built, not casual, the architecture of interest in the clothes of small talk, and the disguise was thin enough that Lillian could see through it but not quite thin enough that she could name what was underneath. You have strong hands, for a yoga instructor. Therapeutic massage before the yoga. The body doesn't forget what it practiced. A pause with actual weight in it. It doesn't. That is not always a gift. For you, it is. Waiting in the pause that followed. Then, your grandmother. When you mentioned, is she well? Half a sentence dropped in passing, that was all she'd given, retrieved now and held. 81, she doesn't need me to carry her, she's very clear about that. Again, that brief movement in Mrs. Kang's voice, there and gone. She sounds like a woman I would respect. 20 minutes total. A deliberate close, a specific promise to be in touch that was not social filler, it was stated intention, and the difference between those two things was audible in how it was delivered. Lillian stood with the phone after, in the studio quiet, and understood two things. First, that the call had been about more than the ankle. Second, that she had answered every question honestly, which was the only thing available to her, and that this honesty had been received and filed by a woman who missed very little. What she didn't know. What Mrs. Kang said to her son after she hung up, in the tone she reserved for things she intended to say once. That the woman had carried her like she was worth carrying. That she needed him to not be awkward about this one. Sung-ho said nothing immediately. His mother didn't wait for him to. Thursday morning, a message arrived. No preamble, photography exhibition. Museum near Gyeongbokgung. I haven't been. If you haven't either, no pressure attached to the open end of that sentence. Just information and a deliberately incomplete thought. She hadn't been. She went. He was at the entrance when she arrived. She registered this at once. He had timed it so he would be there first, which meant the 40 minutes had been a decision and not an accident. She noted it, said nothing about it. The first 2 rooms were different from the restaurant. No performance management. No gap between the impression and the person being consciously maintained and monitored. Just 2 people moving through a space together with the specific ease that comes not from comfort, but from the absence of pretense, which is a different and more durable thing. They stood in front of a large format photograph of an empty market street at dawn, the kind of image that does not demand a response. Neither of them reached for language to fill the space around it. You didn't have to come yourself. Said in the doorway between rooms 2 and 3. Not an accusation, an observation with an open end. I know. You could have sent someone. I know that too. Silence that followed those last 3 words was the most honest exchange since the curb. 2 people who had traveled to the same understanding from different directions and were sitting in the overlap without narrating it. Neither of them reached to close it. The last room. Portraits. Elderly Koreans photographed in the spaces they had inhabited for decades. A fisherman at the harbor he'd worked since before his children were born. A woman at a market stall occupying the same location for 40 years, the same hands behind the same counter. A man at a game of baduk with an opponent who had been his opponent every Thursday for 30 years. Shot on a Thursday, game mid-progress. Both men looking at the board with the quality of attention that belongs to people for whom the board is only part of what they're seeing. The caption, met at 13. Lillian stood in front of it longer than the rest. When they were both young enough to be embarrassed about being seen, Sung-ho said, reading the rest of it beside her. Not filling the silence, adding to it. A distinction she caught. She glanced at him. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. She went back to the photograph, 30 years of Thursday games that started in embarrassment. She thought about the distance between the beginning of a thing and the room it eventually occupies, about how rarely either end looks like the other. Coffee afterward at a place 2 streets over that had been exactly itself for 2 decades and had no plans to become anything else. Mismatched chairs, seriously good coffee, the low, comfortable noise of people not there to be seen. They stayed an hour and 15 minutes. Neither counted. Both were aware. She told him about her grandmother, the fall at 73, the way the system managed her after, the specific clarity of watching a body treated as a liability rather than an intelligence and deciding, at 23, to spend her life doing the opposite of that. He listened in the register of someone who has decided something is worth keeping. She noticed the quality of it. It was not a performance of listening. It was the actual thing. When she got home that evening, the ambiguous weight that had been sitting in her chest since the curb had changed. Not resolved. Lighter. Moving from unanswered to in progress, and those are not the same weight at all. Subin had known about the restaurant reservation before it happened. 2 years of sustained proximity teaches you the shape of a person's calendar. The rhythm of it, the patterns, the kinds of evenings that get scheduled in the kinds of places a certain class of dinner is held. The reservation had not been hard to locate. She had told herself, one dinner. He had dinners. This was not something that required a response, but the yoga studio the next morning, and 40 minutes. And then 2 consecutive days, the same woman both times. She had been watching long enough to understand that consecutive days was not incidental. It was the beginning of a pattern establishing its footing, and she had survived in Sung-ho's orbit for 2 years by one governing principle that had never failed her. The only place to interrupt a pattern is before it becomes one. After that, you are working with material that no longer bends. She reached for her phone. Han Jae-woo had been at the restaurant that night, 2 tables over, positioned there by the kind of coincidence that is not entirely coincidental when a man with a financial stake in the stability of certain social arrangements tends to place himself near information that affects those arrangements. Tell me how the dinner went. He replied within the hour. He used words with weight. Connection. Visible. He described the evening as 2 people who had found something real. The language was calibrated for someone already looking for urgency. It located the need and filled it. He did not describe the curb. He did not describe the separate cabs, the hesitation, the good night that had been more ending than beginning. He left all of that out, not oversight. The leaving out was the instrument, selected deliberately because he understood what it would produce. What Subin received was the architecture of something already underway. What Han Jae-woo protected with the omission was a property arrangement requiring a specific social structure to remain intact, a deal that would not survive a significant reordering of who occupied which proximity to Sung-ho's life and decisions. He had a position. He protected it with the oldest available tool, a version of the truth engineered to produce a specific response by omitting the part that would have eliminated it. Subin set the phone down and considered which doors had the widest reach into the rooms that mattered. She was not loud. That was never her register. 2 years had taught her the topography of Sung-ho's world, the specific people who carried information, the rooms where impressions formed before decisions were made, the architecture of how narrative traveled when it had the right infrastructure. She had built access to that infrastructure carefully, never aggressively. The way you build something you intend to use when the moment requires it. Her first move was not a lie. She was too precise for lies, which are fragile by nature and require maintenance that compounds. A framing instead introduced without a name attached, positioned rather than claimed. Recent, circumstantial. The kind of thing that looks like something from close up and from the correct distance is considerably less. 2 people, 2 placements. The architecture doing what she had spent 2 years building it to do. The frame traveled into rooms Lillian had never entered and had no way of knowing existed. By Wednesday, it reached someone who had been at the studio for 18 months and cared enough about Lillian to feel genuinely bad being the one to deliver it. Wednesday, mid-session. The client said it in the specific register of someone who has decided the message is worth the discomfort of delivering it. Some talk. About the studio. About who the owner had been seen with. About whether it was a pause, visible discomfort appropriate for reasons she did not spell out. I just thought you should know. I'm not one for this kind of thing. Lillian said thank you. Meant it. Finished the last 10 minutes of the session with exactly the same quality of attention as every session before this one. She walked her to the door, said goodbye, listened to the door close, stood in the middle of the empty studio. She let herself be angry first. The private kind, clean, honest, with no audience. Not at being targeted, which was outside her control. At the cost. At the specific unfairness of having something deployed against her before she had been given the chance to decide what she was building. That was worth nomming to herself before she did anything else with it. She named it. Then she set it down. She had navigated versions of this before. She knew its machinery, the unnamed source, the framing without a face, the message dressed as concern that translates to, "You are somewhere you are not expected to remain." She understood what it wanted from her. She understood what she was not going to give it. She went to prepare for the next session. Mrs. Kang made her appointment that Monday. Called the studio directly. Asked about Tuesday morning openings. 2 spaces. She took one. She cited the ankle, the therapeutic component, the value of structured rehabilitation, all of it true. None of it the complete truth. She had formed her read of Lillian Harris on a pavement on an October evening before anyone else in the family had the information required to form one. That timing was not coincidental. She had been watching the shape of her son's life long enough to know which things, once allowed to close, do not easily reopen. She was not going to let this one close. The appointment was an anchor, placed early, before anyone could build an argument against it. She told no one until Thursday. She did not tell Gi-jeong at all. Gi-jeong was Sung-ho's father's older brother, a man whose authority existed entirely in the accumulation of presence. Decades of being in the room for the decisions that mattered had made the room his in a way that was never written down because it didn't need to be. He had opinions about the architecture of Sung-ho's life. He had never been reluctant to deliver them to the people who needed to receive them. He called Wednesday morning. He used categories, not names. The studio, the demographic, the years of operation, the neighborhood. Research assembled in the manner of someone building a case rather than developing an understanding. The distinction is audible if you know what to listen for. He spoke about the rooms Sung-ho occupied, the people those rooms required, the years of careful positioning and what disruption would cost. He named Subin as a structural element, not a person. He said he assumed Sung-ho understood what was at stake. Sung-ho listened. Did not interrupt. Thanked him. Ended the call, sat with the phone on the table, then called Moon Jae-ho, Friday evening. Sung-ho arrived at the studio with food, not the announcement of effort, the evidence of knowledge, a specific place. Containers he knew the dimensions of. He'd been before, or someone who paid attention to the specifics of what he liked had been, which in a man like him is the same thing expressed differently. He carried it without qualification, as if showing up at someone's studio on a Friday evening with dinner was a decision he had made and was not going to hedge. The private session had run late. When Lillian opened the door, she was still in her instructor's clothes, hair up, the day still visible on her, and she did not go change because that would have been a performance, and she had moved past the point where she had energy to perform. They ate at the low table near the window. Seoul outside in mid-October, the air already carrying the cold edge of what was coming. The comfortable sounds of a city settling into its evening. She ate without managing herself. He ate without monitoring her, which was the right instinct and not universally present in men who operated in his register. She recognized the containers in Sadong Place, the one she'd ordered from once during a workshop overrun when she hadn't had time to leave. She said nothing about the recognition. For a while, neither of them needed language. That was not a small thing. The absence of required conversation, the ease of being in the same space without the social obligation of filling it, had taken less time to arrive at than she'd expected. She had been tracking how long. She set her chopsticks down. Someone's been running a campaign. Direct. No softening inserted between the information and the person receiving it. About me. About whether I belong anywhere near your orbit. It reached a client this week. He went still, not the stillness of surprise, the other kind. The stillness of a man applying pressure to something that wants to move faster than the pressure allows. I know, she looked at him. I didn't know its reach until recently, but I knew something was moving. The measured breath of someone who is choosing words with genuine care, not performance of care. I'm handling it. I'm not asking you to handle it for me. I know that. She held his eyes without softening them. I already handled it. I'm not undone. I'm telling you because you should know I know, not because I need rescue. Beat between those words, and what came next was not comfortable and was not uncomfortable. It was honest, which is its own category, and which sometimes requires sitting in friction rather than smoothing it away. He nodded. Once. Slow. Something reached you that should have been stopped before it did. Not an apology for failing to protect her. More precise than that, the acknowledgement that a cost had been imposed on her before it had any right to be. The distinction between those two statements was not small, and she heard it. They finished eating. He stayed late. That was also not nothing. Mrs. Kang arrived at the studio Tuesday morning with the gait of a woman honoring a recovery timeline with the same discipline she brought to everything. She took her shoes off at the door. Found her way across the space, nodding the bamboo flooring, the courtyard window, the two cups on the low table, with the manner of someone orienting themselves in a new room without requiring it to be explained. She looked at her son in the chair by the window. Something moved across her expression. Brief, deliberately brief. Sit down, she told him. You're not in trouble. He had started to rise with the instinct of a man who was not entirely certain that was true. He sat back down. She turned to Lillian. Ankle, better every session. Good. She lowered herself to the mat with the exact care of someone respecting a protocol she'd been given specific instructions about. Good. 45 minutes. Mrs. Kang worked the way she did everything, complete attention, no performance of the attention. Every instruction received and applied. Every progression engaged honestly. She did not rush the recovery, and she did not milk it. She understood that process requires real participation, and she gave it. Sung-ho said nothing during the session. Somewhere around the 15-minute mark, he set his phone face down on the side table and did not retrieve it. He was in the room in the full sense, not physically present while attending to something else, but actually there, actually watching, with the specific quality of attention that belongs to a person who has stopped managing competing priorities and given this one all the space it has, she noticed. Without marking the noticing in any visible way. When the session ended and Mrs. Kang was lacing her shoes with the careful economy of her recovery, she looked up at her son. Thursday dinner. You're both coming. Not an invitation. A fact delivered to the people it concerned. Sung-ho looked at Lillian. Brief. Something sitting between a question and a decision that had already been made, not quite a smile, but containing something a smile contains. Lillian looked back. No, a better place than the first one. Something in him released. A fraction, but a visible fraction, and she had been learning to read fractions for weeks now. Better than the first one, he said. Mrs. Kang finished her laces. Rose carefully. Picked up her bag, moved toward the door. Then paused. She turned back and looked at Lillian with the same quality of look she had given her on the pavement. The real one. The assessment that was not social. Same time next Tuesday. Same time next Tuesday. She went through the door. The sound of it closing was clean and settled and certain. The campaign pushed to full pressure that same week. What Subin had built was not loud. It had never been loud, but it had reach. The infrastructure of 2 years meant the framing traveled into rooms she did not have to enter herself. The narrative it carried was not a lie. It was a positioning, recent, circumstantial, the category of thing that appears significant from proximity, and from the correct distance, reveals itself as considerably less. Placed with precision. Carried by people who didn't know they were carrying it, what she hadn't accounted for. Mrs. Kang had already moved before the campaign reached full extension. The uncle's call arrived the same week, carrying a different kind of pressure from the opposite direction, family architecture rather than social. The rooms, the alignment, the years of positioning, the element he was not going to name but was clearly nomming. Sung-ho listened, did not interrupt, thanked him, ended the call. He sat for a moment with the phone on the table, then called Moon Jae-ho, everything on the campaign. Source. Reach. Point of origin. By Saturday morning. 2 documents on the table. Moon Jae-ho delivered them without commentary, because the commentary was Sung-ho's job and not his. Flat October light through the office windows. The kind of morning that leaves nothing in shadow. Sung-ho read both documents. Then read the first one again, not from missing something, but from requiring the full shape of it to exist completely in his understanding before he decided what the shape required. He set them down. Han Jae-woo. The information Subin used to build the campaign came from what he told her about the dinner. What he told her was not what happened at the dinner. Quality of Sung-ho's stillness, changed, in a way not visible to anyone who hadn't spent years reading its specific registers. This was not the stillness of control being applied to forward motion. This was what lives past the anger, past the point where the anger has already concluded, and what remains is only what needs to be done. He removed the ending, described the evening in a way designed to produce urgency. The elements he left out were the ones that would have eliminated it. I know what I said goodnight to. A pause carrying a specific temperature. He handed her a different door and watched her walk through it, and he did it for the property deal. Yes, Moon Jae-ho placed a third page alongside the others. 3 lines. The stake, the structure, the cost to Han Jae-woo if the social architecture shifted. Sung-ho folded all 3 pages together, precise. The fold of something being contained rather than concluded, held for the correct moment, not dismissed. Subin, this afternoon. Moon Jae-ho wrote it down. Han Jae-woo, Tuesday morning. His assistant needs to clear it. Subin arrived dressed for a different meeting. 11 minutes later, she would understand the distinction. She had learned to read the temperature of him over 2 years, and she had been accurate at it consistently. The specific quality of his calm that meant space. That meant access. That meant she remained inside the architecture of his consideration. She had read it correctly every time, which had produced in her the particular blind spot that consistent accuracy creates, the failure to account for the possibility that what she was reading had sometimes been managed specifically for her benefit. He told her what he knew, not the architecture in full, only what was sufficient. The framing, its reach, the gap between what Han Jae-woo had given her and what had actually occurred at the restaurant, at the curb, in the cab. He named the ending she had never been given. He named it clearly, without performance. She was still for a long time, in her face during the stillness. Not guilt, she was too precise for guilt, which requires the full acknowledgement she had not yet completely arrived at. Something more specific. The expression of a person watching a plan they built and maintained and trusted begin to disassemble in a single conversation because the variable they hadn't accounted for was the precision of the man across from them. You knew it wasn't what he described. Not a question. I knew it was more than it looked. Even, careful, the honesty of someone who has decided precision is the last available resource. 2 years, Sung-ho. I know that. Not cold. Exact. The precision of a man who has prepared this and is not going to be deflected by the truth of what she just said, which is true, and which he is not pretending is not. The access, the rooms, the reach you built in those 2 years, it's done. Not publicly, not dramatically. Immediately and completely. 11 minutes, nothing would have changed the number. Han Jae-woo arrived expecting a transaction. Sung-ho let him sit. Let him begin, offered nothing back. Let the silence do what silence does to a man who has arranged a meeting and discovered the room belongs to someone else. Han Jae-woo spoke for 90 seconds before the shape of it recalibrated. Then the 3 pages went onto the table. Han Jae-woo looked at them. He understood what they contained, the understanding of a man who has arrived at a meeting he believed he called and discovered he was summoned. I told her what I saw. You told her a version. The flatness in Sung-ho's voice was not managed anger. It was the thing past it, where anger has already reached its conclusion and what remains is only execution. You removed the curb, the separate cabs, the good night that wasn't a beginning. What you left created a campaign that landed on someone who had earned none of it. A pause, long enough to be deliberate. I understand you had a position. I'm telling you it wasn't worth the instrument you used to protect it. The deal is restructured. Your stake is adjusted. That is the consequence. No theater. The kind of response that doesn't require volume because its precision does the work that volume would only approximate. Han Jae-woo searched for something to say. Found nothing that would help. Looked at the pages. Picked up his jacket. The meeting with Gi Jeong was different in every register. Sung-ho drove himself. The family home. The room that had held significant conversations long enough to carry that weight in the quality of its silence. Late morning light through the window facing the garden. The particular gravity of a space used to being the site of things that matter. He let the uncle speak. He let him make the full case. Architecture, rooms, alignment, years of positioning and their cost if disrupted. He did not interrupt. He did not perform patience. He actually had it because the uncle was not wrong that the architecture existed, and Sung-ho had not come to win by pretending the architecture was fictional. He waited until the case was complete, until every component of the argument had been placed on the table and the uncle had finished placing it. My mother met her before any of this began, before the campaign, before your call, before I had decided anything. Even deliberate. The pace of a man who has prepared this and is going to deliver it at the speed it requires. She formed her opinion without any of the information you're using to form yours. Gijiang was quiet. She told me what she saw. She said, that woman carried me like I was worth carrying. A pause, long enough to be intentional. She was not performing. She did not know whose mother she was helping. She helped because the woman was on the ground and it was the right thing to do. My mother has always known people. That has never failed to be true. I trust her judgment more than I trust the architecture. There was no available response to this that did not require arguing that the mother's read was inferior to the social calculus. Gijiang understood that argument. He also understood that he could hear it collapsing before he finished making it, which made it an argument he was not going to make. He produced the sound of someone withdrawing from a field without formally conceding it. The kind of sound that means the subject has been heard and received and will not be raised again in this form. The conversation moved to other subjects. The subject did not return. Lillian learned what happened the way you learn things when the atmosphere around a situation changes, and the change itself is the announcement. She had spent 4 days carrying the framing without letting it carry her. Not heavily, not catastrophically, but present, the way a persistent low sound is present once you've stopped trying to locate its source and accepted it as part of the room's texture. She navigated it in the only way she knew how, without collapsing into it and without performing the not collapsing, because she understood the difference between those two things, and the performance was one she had no patience for. She had built a portrait of the person behind it without a name attached. The precision of someone with built access, the patience of a woman who had spent time earning the architecture she was using, the intelligence of choosing precision over volume, framing over assertion. Lillian could hold analytical respect for the craft of a thing while holding zero ambiguity about what the craft was designed to accomplish. Understanding the instrument does not mean accepting that it should be aimed at you. She had not accepted it. She was not going to start. Monday. Sung-ho called. And the texture of the conversation was different, not in what was said, in what was absent, the low peripheral awareness, the specific, draining consciousness of existing inside a narrative she hadn't authored and couldn't fully see had lifted. Not lighter. Gone. The unmistakable distinction between something reduced and something removed, she noticed. She let the moment settle into a shape she could hold. Is it handled? Yes. All of it. All of it. She sat with that. Let it move through her without rushing the pace of the moving. The cost had been real, the framing, the weight of it, the specific unfairness of something being deployed against her before she had been given the chance to decide what she was or wasn't building. None of that was erased by resolution. Real is not the same as erased, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. But acknowledgement does something to cost that cost cannot do for itself. Genuine acknowledgement, the actual reckoning, not the performed version. It doesn't remove the room the cost occupied. It makes the room survivable. A space you can move through rather than one that holds you in place. The room was smaller now. Survivable. She could move. Okay, she said, just that. It was enough. He came to the studio on a Tuesday, no message the day before, no arrangement made. Just that morning, I'll be near the studio around 10 if you're open. She was always open Tuesday mornings. She saw Moon Jae-ho's car from the window before the knock, parked at the curb with the stillness of a man who has arrived somewhere, is not leaving, and requires nothing from the waiting. She set down the cup she was holding, set it with care, walked to the door. Sung-ho was at the base of the step, the same step. The uneven lip she had meant to report since August, the one that had caught an ankle on an October evening and started everything that had followed. He was standing at the bottom of it looking up at the door, and when it opened, he did not reach for language immediately. He looked at her in the morning light, the controlled composure she had been reading since the first dinner, the precision of him, and underneath it, visible in a way it hadn't been at the restaurant or the exhibition or the evenings in the studio, was something that was not composure at all. He was not dressed for a business day. She registered this first. Not deliberately casual, just the absence of armor. The particular quality of someone who has decided that this meeting does not require it. There's no necklace this time. Your mother's ankle is fine. Is, so. He came up the step. Close enough now for the morning light to do what it did to him. The lines of his face, the familiar precision, the thing sitting underneath the control that had been there since the first dinner and had needed all of this to finally find its way to the surface. They had found the certainty. 3 weeks, a campaign, an uncle, the specific interference of a city that had decided, through the mechanism of a step and an ankle and a mother who missed nothing and moved early, that these two people were not finished with what they'd started. I came because I wanted to. Even voice. The evenness of something said plainly on purpose, without scaffolding, without the architecture of implication it would have been delivered inside 2 weeks ago. She held his gaze for a moment. I know. She stepped back from the door. He came in, tea. The same kettle. The same unhurried motion as the morning of the necklace. Except that morning she had been assembling herself around a surprise, and this morning she was assembling herself around something she had already, somewhere in the past 3 weeks, stopped being surprised by. The bamboo flooring caught the light near the entrance the same way it had caught it the first morning. She noted the continuity without nomming it. Thought briefly of Mrs. Kang on the phone. New floors in old buildings sound different, more certain. She had been on the ground in pain in the dark, and she had been cataloging the flooring. Lillian understood that now in a way she hadn't fully understood then. The catalog had not been incidental. Nothing about Mrs. Kang was incidental. She brought the cups over. He wrapped both hands around his, both hands, the same unguarded gesture as the first morning, the tell that appeared before the armor could assemble itself. She sat across from him and did not reach to fill the silence before it was ready to be filled. They talked with the ease of two people who have moved through enough friction together that what remains between them is livable, not the unchallenged ease of something untested, but the specific ease of something that has been tested and is still here. She did not perform interest in what he said. He did not perform presence. The conversation found its own pace and they followed it without managing the following. He asked about the workshop program, the space above the studio, the winter expansion for elderly clients. She had mentioned it once, in passing, in the margin of a different conversation at the coffee place. He had kept it. He asked the specific questions of someone who was listening when it was mentioned and wanted her to know he had been. The infrastructure requirements, the conversion challenges of a commercial space that had been exactly itself for decades, the client pipeline for a program that did not yet exist. Questions that said, without saying it directly, I was there, I was paying attention, and I kept what you gave me. She answered with the same quality back. And they both understood what was being exchanged underneath the words about renovation budgets and session scheduling, and the specific challenges of bamboo installation on the floor above an active studio. Mrs. Kang arrived at 11. She came through the door with the deliberate care of her recovery. Exact, unhurried, the movement of a woman honoring a process she had been given specific instructions about and intended to honor precisely. She set her bag on the shelf. Oriented herself, bamboo window, 2 cups on the low table, her son in the chair, something moved across her face. Brief, controlled, but it had been there. Sit down. She looked at him. You're not in trouble. I know. He sat. She turned to Lillian. The ankle. Better every session. Good. Lowering herself to the mat with the exact, careful economy of her recovery. Good. 45 minutes. Mrs. Kang worked the way she did everything. Total attention, no performance of the attention. Every instruction received and applied without resistance or negotiation. Every progression engaged with the honesty of someone who has decided that recovery requires genuine participation and has committed to providing it. She did not rush, and she did not perform patience. She simply did the work, which is a rarer quality than it sounds. Sung-ho did not speak during the session. Somewhere around the 15-minute mark, he set his phone face down on the side table and did not reach for it again. Not aside, face down, with the deliberate quality of a gesture that means this has been decided. He was present in the room in the full sense, not physically occupying a space while his attention lived somewhere else, but actually there. Watching his mother work through the rehabilitation sequence with the focus she gave everything. With all of his attention given to this, and none of it held elsewhere, she noticed. She did not mark the noticing in any visible way. She continued guiding Mrs. Kang through the progression, the ankle work, the joint stabilization, the balance rebuilding, with exactly the same quality of attention she gave every session, the quality that did not vary based on who was watching or whether anyone was watching at all. When it ended, and Mrs. Kang was lacing her shoes with the careful deliberateness of a woman honoring a recovery protocol she intended to honor exactly. She looked up at her son in the chair. She took him in, the phone still face down, the undivided presence, the 2 cups on the low table. The morning light doing what it had been doing since the beginning of this, making everything it touched look slightly more certain than usual. Something moved across her face. Brief. It did not require announcement. Thursday dinner, you're both coming. Not an invitation. A fact delivered to the relevant people. Sung-ho looked at Lillian, brief. Something in it that sat between a question and a decision already made, not quite a smile, but containing what a smile contains. She looked back. No, a better place. Better than the first one. Something in his expression released a fraction. Visible. Better than the first one, he said. Mrs. Kang finished her laces. Rose with the careful, unhurried dignity of a woman honoring her recovery and not apologizing for it. She picked up her bag, moved toward the door, paused. She turned back and looked at Lillian with the same look she had given her on the pavement. The real one. The assessment that was not performing assessment, the kind where something is actually being weighed. Same time next Tuesday. Same time next Tuesday. She went through the door. The sound of it closing was clean, quiet, certain. It was not what either of them had expected to be standing inside, 3 weeks ago at the curb. The hesitant goodnight. The separate cabs. The night that ended without either of them nomming the 2 real moments that had moved through the dinner, those brief interruptions in the performance where something genuine surfaced and was registered on both sides before the performance came back. Both of them had been certain enough that it was over to leave without reaching for anything different. Both of them had been wrong about what the city had already decided for them. An ankle on a step. A necklace on pavement. A phone call from a mother who had been on the ground in pain on an October evening and had filed, with the precision of a woman who understood exactly what she was looking at, the detail that mattered, not the fact of being carried. The quality of it, that distinction was the whole of it. Anyone could help a person off the ground. What she had given was different, the complete transfer of weight, the adjustment for every small signal, the language that grounded rather than performed. The quality that only exists in someone who has decided to be entirely present rather than present enough. A woman with 75 years of reading people would carry that detail into a morning call and describe it with the deliberate precision of someone who needs a specific person to understand before she finishes speaking. Lillian had not been looking for any of this when she pushed through the studio door. The day was 40 seconds from finished. She moved toward the sound because that was simply what she did, the bone-deep orientation of a woman who had built her life around the understanding that the decision to walk past a need costs more than the decision to meet it. Not policy, not maintained position, the thing that was simply true about her, and it had been seen, filed, carried. That was the detail that brought him to the door with a necklace. That brought him back with nothing in his hand at all. That outlasted an awkward ending and separate cabs, and a campaign and a family argument and a 40-minute decision that had not yet been named. She moved toward need. The city moved toward her. Seoul does this. Finds the narrow space between what people almost released and what they almost didn't reach for, and arranges things inside it, quietly, through the mechanisms of accident and coincidence and one mother who moved early and placed an anchor before anyone had the chance to build an argument against it. The arrangement does not announce itself. It arrives as sound through glass, as a necklace left on pavement, as a jade pendant worn on a day considered significant. The ankle was an accident. The necklace was coincidence. The 40 minutes was a choice. Thursday dinner would be another. And every choice after that would be a choice, accumulating weight, building the kind of thing that ends up photographed in the last room of an exhibition. 2 people who began in something uncertain and arrived somewhere else entirely. And the distance between the 2 ends of it longer and stranger and better than either of them could have described when they said a hesitant goodnight at a curb in October and got into separate cabs without looking back. Mrs. Kang would be at Thursday's dinner. Careful ankle. Tuesday's sessions already on the calendar. The peripheral vision that registered everything and announced nothing, that had placed one small careful anchor on a pavement on an October evening, and had never once doubted where it would land. She had been worth carrying. Everything that came after, every door, every dinner, every Tuesday morning, had proven the same thing. If you've been here since the beginning, since the step, since the sound through the glass, since the carry, you already know what that moment was worth. Drop it in the comments. What hit hardest? And if this is the first story of Lillian's you've found, stay close. The city isn't finished arranging things.